Hello again and welcome back. Have you ever tried to beat some sense into a procreationist, trying to convince him with logic and such, trying to convince him that your position is reasonable and logical, but he simply doesn't seem to understand. He simply doesn't seem to want to accept what you are proposing. They come up with all sorts of reasons, trying to dismantle whatever you say, while the argument is quite straightforward. The premises are true, and the conclusion follows from the premises. So we have both validity and soundness, but yet, those people simply don't want to accept. We shouldn't harm people unnecessarily. Yes. Life entails harm? Yes. Bringing people to existence is not necessary? Yes. Therefore, we shouldn't bring children to existence. They would actually agree pretty much to all of those premises, but at the end, they simply don't want to agree with the conclusion. Even though if you agree with the premises, you need necessarily to agree with the conclusion. They plead that the conclusion doesn't follow from the premises, but I simply do not see how it doesn't. But anyway, the problem when you are trying to talk to somebody and share your perspective about antinatalism, trying to defend your position, not wanting to bring children to existence, you are presuming that you are sharing common ground of rationality. You are presuming that you are sharing both respectfulness towards logic and reason, but this is never the case. Most of them actually argue from bad faith. Passion beats reason. The idea of procreation is a passionate one. The idea of wanting to have kids and wanting to have a family is rather an emotional one. Uh, People simply don't want to perceive their parents as people who have done actually harm to them. They simply don't want to stay lonely their whole lives. You seem as though you're taking something very intrinsic to their identity and how they see life. The desire for procreation doesn't come from logic, it comes from emotion. It comes from a biological necessity. It comes from a desire for pleasure. Everything actually comes from pleasure. Even the idea of not wanting to have children. If by choosing not to have children, you are still benefiting from the pleasure of compassion and from the pleasure of not seeing your children suffer in their life. So you avoid the pain of moral accountability, and avoidance of pain is pleasure. But people do not think the same way because they are simply different. I simply do have the need to stress this out. It just happens that the logic is in the side of antinatalists because antinatalism also could come from emotion. I'm not gonna state that the majority is, but a lot of them are. Personally, I have adopted the idea of antinatalism when I was 20 years of age, from a very depressing period that I simply wish to never have been born. I definitely did not check the logic of asymmetry. I definitely did not check arguments for antinatalism. I definitely did not check the biological nature of humans and how the nervous system actually operates and the hedonic treadmill and all that. It was simply that I felt really bad and I simply wished to never have been born and just decided out of that I would never want to subject somebody, not to subject him necessarily because I wouldn't know, but I just didn't want to subject somebody to the chance of of him experiencing the same thing that I have experienced. Some of you would actually say that that is enough reasoning. Just because you have experienced a bad, you wish that you have never started to exist. You are subtly thinking that if you have never started to exist, you wouldn't be deprived of anything, right? But I still think that, although this might be true, but I still think that emotion is the base on that because that strength of emotion is what led me to think of that. It is only after adopting this philosophical position that I have started to study the philosophy and acquaint myself with the logic and the arguments. But the problem here is, as you know, I'm a nihilist. Nihilism doesn't really give me some moral reference to work with. In the past videos, All I have tried to do is demonstrate to people that are watching me that they have a cognitive dissonance in their reasoning. Since you accept the premises, you cannot not accept the conclusion. That's what I've been doing. This is not my personal case. I am a nihilist. I cannot have a reference or standard for morality because morality for me is subjective, is not something which is true about the world. For me, the procreationist is the same as the antinatalist. The procreationist simply desires the pleasure of having children around him because basically humans are social animals. And the antinatalist is very compassionate that he simply wants the pleasure of not subjecting any people on his responsibility to unnecessary harm. Both categories, in the eyes of the nihilist, are just animals that seek pleasure. And just because they are wired differently and there is no free will, they are determined to seek pleasure differently. Antinatalists could never be beaten with emotion because their stance is logical, and procreationists could never be beaten with logic because their stance is emotional. We could have a very compassionate, devout antinatalist, but still eats meat. If he accepts the arguments of antinatalism, why doesn't he accept the arguments for veganism? We're all animals and we are all suffering in this world together. Maybe differently, but the suffering is still there. We all have nervous systems that are capable of pain. An antinatalist could go on advocate for antinatalism, but still have a steak in his lunch. He doesn't want new humans to be reproduced because they would be subject to unnecessary suffering. Yet at the same time, he is subjecting unnecessary suffering for the new pigs or new cows that would be reproduced because the supply must meet the demand. How is this possible? This is hypocrisy. Why are you so concerned about the suffering of humans while you don't seem to share the same concern for animals? This is speciesism, being discriminatory to one's own species. But this doesn't solve it, it's still morally corrupt. So, how is this possible? It's simply emotion. People simply do not care about new cows being brought to existence, but they definitely care about new humans being brought to existence. They have more compassion towards their own species. So, that is simply emotion. It's definitely emotion, driven from compassion towards your own species from one side, and for convenience, to keep having a presumably good diet from another side. That's emotion for you. And we could have a vegan who is against animal suffering at all, but still get on with his life, get married and have children. How is this possible? It's again emotion. He feels the compassion towards animals, but this compassion couldn't be extended towards his own species, towards his own fellow humans. Or it could be the case, but simply there wasn't a reason enough to alter his desire for having a family and to quench loneliness. So that's emotion one more time. A desire for pleasure that transcends logic and rationality. So the solution for all of this veganism arguments and antinatalism arguments is simply one simple phrase. It's I don't care. That's it. A person who simply doesn't care couldn't be subject to any type of moral accountability. Do you agree that we shouldn't harm people unnecessarily? Yes. Does life entail harm? Yes. Is reproduction necessary? No. Therefore, we shouldn't bring humans into existence? No. Why is that? I simply don't care about all that. I don't. I want to propagate my DNA. I want to have pleasure. I want to have children as my friends, and I want to have family and all that. As much as this is true, as much as bringing humans to existence is categorically immoral because existence itself is painful, I simply do not care. You're having pleasure from compassion of not bringing children to existence, and I'm having pleasure from having a family. You are following pleasure as much as I am following it. As much as I am concerned, we are the same. It's just a preferential difference. Would you plead to a standard of morality? Morality is subjective. Whatever you say is not really a true claim about the world. You're simply expressing a preference. But that would lead you to accept genocide, racism, slavery, and all sorts of immoral behaviors. Yes, but I simply do not care. The statement I do not care could never be countered with reason because he seems to accept the reason and the rationality behind your arguments, but he simply doesn't care. Could never be again countered with emotion because he again shows that he understands your emotions. He shows that he is feeling where you come from, but he simply doesn't care. As much as you feel good to not object children to unnecessary suffering, how about me? How about my own pleasure of having my family? You claim to have a standard of truth that stems from an objective morality or something like that, but I simply don't subscribe to it. I simply want to propagate my DNA, have a family, and live a social life. I think a lot of people actually do not care, but they still care to not say, I don't care, because they presume once they say that, they would actually present an image of being a moral monster. Deep within, they still don't care. This is what they feel in barbecues, and this is what they feel when they hold their new baby. But they still care to present a moral surface. The desire for reproduction is strong and hard to conquer. All of our ancestors had it and succeeded to do it. We are really an exception, but anyway, it's just a difference in terms of preference for pleasure. Nothing has really any inherent meaning into it. But don't let that slip into your mind negatively, but take it positively. If nothing doesn't have any meaning, I might as well make my own and have fun as I am pursuing it. Thanks again for watching, and see you in the next one.